Good evening. My guest for this segment of our town is Paul Santinello. He's a incumbent selectman running for re-election for how many terms now?
This will be my fourth if I get reelected.
Your fourth term?
Yeah.
Getting up there.
Getting up there, yeah.
You're pushing for my record there.
I don't know if I'm pushing for that, but I'm getting. That dawned on me that it would be 4 terms. That's pretty daunting. I mean,
It's 3-year terms, so you've been 9 years.
yeah, and a year on the school committee before that, and 2 years on the finance committee before that. So, and it just doesn't seem like it's been that long.
Well, that's a good sign.
Oh, absolutely. I enjoy it, so that's a good thing.
Yeah, so why are you running again?
I think there's a lot that still needs to be done. If you look at some of the things that we've been talking about just in this past year, for example, streetlights purchase. I think we've been talking about that for 3 or 4 years now, and we've been talking. And I think it's really been at the insistence of the select board that it gets pushed forward and has been pushed forward. So we're getting closer, but we're not there.
Are you supportive of that?
Very much so. I think there's, well, even if it's, I'm very much looking forward to finding out what the impact is to the town of Long Meadow. Because we talk about, I think it was about 3 or 4 years ago, we gave a directive to the town manager as a board to talk to her department heads and come back with Robin Crosby, talk to the department heads and come back with income producing ideas. And it didn't fail, it just didn't produce. Okay, and I won't call it a failure because people started to think, and they thought of some good things, but you know, one idea was to use the DPW lot as an impound area because you do receive rental income, but it's probably not the best thing you want to put in an area. But it was an idea, and that's what we were looking for. And what we found was people that are really good at municipal government and managing their departments are not entrepreneurial in spirit. They can find every crumb and cookie or cracker in the corner to bring back to their department, but they're not really good at entrepreneurial ideas. And that's okay, they shouldn't be, because that's really not what they were.
We're not trying to make money.
Right, they're not educated for, and I mean, you know, they didn't go to college for that and that type of thing. The issue is that, you know, so when you look at it, you say, okay, what are there are very limited things that you can do. You know, Park and Rec was going to open up a little store in the community house, so parents could go there instead of.
They do the passports. I think that's
Correct.
brilliant.
Right, so that was one of the ideas that actually came out of that
Yeah.
thing. So the streetlights is one of them, and I think that was, you know, there was not a summit, it was a forum that the town manager and the chair of the select board put together to talk about the impending crisis, the fiscal cliff we're going to hit.
Well, this is the one recently.
It just happened.
Just happened.
It just happened.
Right.
The meeting the night before that, we spent $144,000 we saved because I came back from the MMA conference and there's an idea to lease a large dump truck instead of purchasing it.
Oh, right.
So we saved $144,000 and spent it in 5 minutes, but yet we're going to hit a fiscal cliff. So I think there's a lot of work that needs to be done in terms of.
Isn't the streetlight project part of the green community money?
Part of that could be that's our placeholder for it, for the green community funding.
Right, and there was, I don't remember how much money, 50,000?
Right, and it won't be enough to purchase the streetlights, but it's the seed money for it. Right. So when you look at it, the opportunity to reduce our cost, if we do something like that, significant, hundreds of thousands of dollars a year.
Right, we spent. Because I remember in the day when we turned off some lights.
I don't know, what was in front of my house that you did?
Yeah, I apologize.
No, thank you.
No,
because it was in the bedroom window. So.
No, but really?
Yeah, we shut street lights.
People don't realize that.
They don't realize
that.
And this would reduce our expenditure to Amico because, as you know, and most people might not, if a street light has been out for a month, we still pay for the electricity even though it's not on. So this gives us better control over it. We might not want street lights in certain places. We might want more. But now we could control it. We can put in LEDs versus what's up there right now, the vapor lamps.
But you
wouldn't
be paying the rent.
We wouldn't be paying the rent, but we would be saving also on the electricity charges if we get to maintain them and put in energy efficient lighting and so forth. Right. So that's one of the things that I really want to see pushed through in my next term.
What's preventing it from going through? I think that it wasn't a priority of the board. It's a big project to do?
It's hard to, you know, when you have 5 people on the board, and I'm not disparaging anybody, but, you know, Mr. Gold and I get this because we've been talking about it for 3 or 4 years. The potential is huge, and trying to get that potential across and have an understanding that this really should be a priority because you can save hundreds of thousands of dollars, potentially save jobs down the road, and not hit the fiscal cliff and hit the debt ceiling or the levy limit and so forth. It just hasn't been, I don't see it where the other 3 board members have really said this is something that we should put our teeth into right now.
So it hasn't been voted on, it hasn't been agreed upon?
It's been a directive, and now the town manager has moved it along, and there's a consultant that we hired, and sometimes we wait on the consultant as opposed to pushing forward.
So it's still in the queue, but just not a priority.
Correct. Well, I don't think it's been the number one priority, and quite frankly, it should be, because this is something that saves the town hundreds of thousands of dollars a year
Right.
in perpetuity.
Yeah, and I might add, you might lose your community,
Well,
that money, the green
yes.
community's money, if you don't start spending it.
Correct.
And you could, more you spend it, the more you have opportunity to get more.
And that's why we should be pushing it forward.
Yeah.
Because it is, and it's a green idea, being able to use energy efficient ideas, energy efficient lighting, right?
Yeah,
So you would
sure.
think that it would go like this. And so that's one of the things that I really would like to see pushed through into next year, not over 3 years.
Okay. Anything else?
Yeah, I think, we're talking about, there was about a year ago or so, actually just about a year ago, there was, Rich Foster and I put something together called the Vision, for lack of a better word.
Right. And you presented that.
And we presented it, and it bounced like a dead cat, okay? And it was that well received. But the idea, quite frankly, was everything that we had on the town meeting before, prior spring town meeting a year ago, this town meeting, the one in the fall, were all the things we were talking about, whether it was the tennis courts, whether it's the Council on Aging, the DPW facility, and so forth.
It was infrastructure?
It was not water and sewer, because that has to go
Right.
separate. This was really talking about our facilities and opportunities to generate revenue, okay? And the idea was simply just to get the select board to put together a steering committee, for, again, lack of a better word, I just came up with terms, to put together a steering committee that consists of like the town manager, representative from the select board, someone from the school committee, finance committee, things like that, members of the community that had expertise in real estate. Not people like me, okay, but not a selectman and so forth. And to really explore the ideas and see if it was something that was viable, just viable, not saying that I want this plan. It might be the wrong plan in its entirety, but it's really taken where the long-term plan left off, or long-range plan rather, not left off, but just was never executed.
Right.
And
Well,
saying,
it actually had some business development.
and that was some of the
sections of it.
basis of the vision. If you go back and look at that,
I remember it.
right, this is some of the, you were on it, right? That
It was.
There's 30 people or so that were on it from our community. So this was really just saying, look at the long-range plan, look at what we're talking about, and it kind of overlaps with it in the sense of, what the long-range plan was talking about for the future stuff, not just painting the lines around Bliss Road and stuff. And really just taking a look and say, if you put this all in context, you start to connect the dots, you could actually come up with a plan for the town of Long Meadow, as opposed to saying, we want a council on aging, we want a DPW facility, and we're just gonna go like this. And we haven't gotten away from that.
It's interesting. It's hard to do. Planners will say you can only plan out so far, and I don't know what the magical number is, but I'm sure it's not 10 or 15 years.
Well, the Russians always said 5.
Well, well, whatever. You really, realistically, you can't go out too far and be realistic, but you can. It gets fuzzier the more beyond 5, the more you go, but it doesn't mean you shouldn't have some
Right.
sort of a.
But this was really looking at things and saying, if we could make A happen,
Sure.
B can happen real easy, and then if B happens, C can happen, and all of a sudden you got dominoes starting to fall. But there was an income proponent of that, which was part of, and I'll give you just a brief synopsis, that we have the water tower property, which isn't being used. It was half owned by the schools, half owned by Park and Rec. We're not building a new school there because we have a new school here, okay? And there's plenty of land on where the middle schools are. Even if we built a new school there, they could be there. So if you took that land and you put it into playing fields, and you had, because the biggest issue we're seeing with Park and Rec, from their board to ours, soccer and lacrosse is growing, okay? So lack of playing fields, adequate playing fields. So if we did something like that, and again, I'm not saying this is the right idea, but this is the thought. You could take DPW and put it on a piece of that property. And I understand there's some covenants with the Wolf Swamp Road property where our fields are currently, and potentially put.
But there's a beautiful piece of land for sale right next to it.
It's not big enough. They eliminated it, but that's a different story. But my idea.
The one in East Long Meadow?
Yeah.
Oh, it was 47 acres.
We were told that wasn't the. Well, anyway, we'll
Oh,
go.
that's off camera.
But the
That's
idea
my
was really,
plan.
but the idea was really just taking a look and saying, if you could do this, then what could you do with that, and then and so forth. And that's why I said the vision really wasn't, it wasn't something that was written in stone saying you've got to accept it and adopt it. It was really just to try to put a steering committee. I don't understand the hesitancy to do that, because quite frankly, at some of our meetings this year, the long range plan has been held up figuratively, as this is what we got to do because the long range plan says we have to do it.
It doesn't say have to, it says
But I don't think
it's an
anybody's
idea.
actually even looked at it. I printed it out. It's pretty neat. I mean,
It's
everything
got
that
some
went
good
into it.
visions,
And I doubt that most people have looked at it. But we cite
Like
it all the
most
time.
plans,
Yes.
it's on the sheet.
So I just think that that was one of the things that I really would love to have seen done, was just put together this steering committee, get people that have the expert. Our community, we're blessed to have engineers, architects, real estate developers, all these guys. I showed the idea to someone and they said, well, what if you did this and did this as opposed to that? And they said, that's why you should be on the steering committee, because you look at land a lot differently than I do.
So if you were chairman of the select board, you would form such a committee?
I would push to form it, because you know what's interesting is that it's already been endorsed by the Park and Rec Department, it's been endorsed by the Finance Committee, and they would like to see the Select Board do it, and have communicated that to the Select Board, and still nothing's been done on it.
Right.
Yeah.
I don't know anything about that. That's
Well, no, I'm just saying,
interesting.
it's been endorsed by both of those boards by votes, and because they want representation on it too,
They
they
want,
should.
what's been endorsed? Your plan
put
or the
together a
idea of the
steering-
steering
a
committee?
steering
Okay,
committee.
so it's not, see, in all that conversation, all I heard was about the plan. I didn't hear about the idea of the steering committee.
You know, that was at the end of the plan.
Yeah,
No, that was at the
No,
last slide,
no,
was
I
saying
tell you,
we're urging the
seriously.
Select Board to put together a steering committee,
to look at
to look at whether it's viable, or
Yeah.
what are the options.
other options even. Yeah,
Because I could
interesting.
be missing something entirely, and that's fine. I'm not saying,
Possible.
it's not probable, but it's possible.
Possible.
But I'm not saying that's what I said, I don't want this to be my plan. It's not, I want to hand it off and say, go look at it. And then take the long-range plan, marry these two things together, and see what you can come up to help Long Meadow.
So what's your take on this red flag about hitting the ceiling, the tax? And they don't go into all the math of it, because I don't think
6 years ago, I ran against someone that, I called it the Chicken Little mentality. And
The
here
sky
we
is
are, the
falling.
sky has fallen. If you look at the assumptions of what the red flag came up with, we're
Yeah.
talking about real estate at 1% growth. During the meeting, Mr. Grant went on the computer and found Zillow, whatever Zillow is, it's a real estate thing,
Yeah.
and said projected growth along middle real estate next year is 3%.
Yeah.
So we could project negative growth.
Right.
We could project whatever growth we want.
OPEC.
Right, it's like OPEB, it's like all
Yeah.
these other things, right?
Yeah.
So when you look at the impending doom, my question was, so then why would we spend $144,000 the night before the meeting to express the impending doom? And it went by a 3-2 vote, if we're really that concerned about it. Because, and I've said this for the last few years, and one of the biggest misnomer or miscommunication to the public is we don't spend enough on capital. Over the last, I'd say, 7 years, we have spent between 5 and 8% a year on capital. Because we have taken free cash, which isn't free,
And borrowed.
and borrowed. We took what I call the credit card debt and put it on the mortgage, and then went back to the credit card, okay? So that's a dangerous game you start to play. And if you go back and look at meetings, you'll see the lone dissenting vote sometimes, or it's a 3-2 vote. And the majority of the board, including someone who's running against me this year, has voted to approve all those projects, okay? I'm not saying they didn't need to be done, but there's also, when they weren't part of the priority or part of the plan, it was just, we have the money, we could also do this.
So do you consider yourself a fiscal conservative?
Very much so. I mean, listen, the way I look at this, Arlene, is that I've gone into this position where this isn't my money. Okay, so this town is, I want to see this town run very much differently than my household. Okay, and I mean that in the sense that, you know, if I have some money in my pocket and it's, you know, I know there's a bill coming and I still want to take my kids for ice cream, we're going to go for ice cream kind of thing. But this isn't my money. There's a fiduciary responsibility, and you know this, and you've done it. I've been at meetings where you drew the line and stood there. So you have a fiduciary responsibility to taxpayers to spend their money in a proper manner. It doesn't mean that you know, the project that we did for a water project or whatever shouldn't have been done.
It was justified, but
But everything's justified.
That's right.
You know, and we went through the budget this year. You know, we cut $18,000. We have a finance subcommittee. Mr. Gold and I are on it. And we came back with a recommendation to cut the budget by $18,000. And you would have thought that we took someone's child. Okay? $18,000 out of a $60 million budget. We shifted money from police and fire overtime into the reserve fund. So what that means is that it's not in a line item, but they can go back to the finance committee if there is a
if they
need
need
for it.
Right.
So when you talk about good budget, and I understand, you know, stuff happens, people retire and stuff. We've had a free cash outlay of over $1 million a year, except 1 year in the last decade. So we're overtaxing people and underspending by $1 million. That also happens to coincide with the override we did about 7 or 8 years ago that put an extra $1 million into the bucket, so to speak, okay?
So we haven't had to have an override every 3 years either.
Correct.
Which
No,
is
no,
what
that's
all of that
right.
doom was predicted as well.
Correct. Every 3 years, we're going to have small, sustainable overrides,
That's right.
whatever.
Right.
But the other thing is that when you look at it, one year we had free cash of over almost $3 million, 2 point something million dollars. We spent it. So when we talk about planning for the future and talk about a council on aging,
We didn't just roll it into operational stabilization?
some of it we did, but the majority of it we spent. Okay, but yet we want a council on aging. We want, and I'm talking about from the select board perspective, not the petitioners. We want a DPW facility, and I think if you go back maybe 4 or 5 months, my saying to the board, or my question to the board is, why don't we just start saving some money instead of spending it? Because either the DPW is a priority or the water and sewer project's a priority. Which one is it? And I know they both have relevance and priorities, because if the North Interceptor fails, that's
Well,
our,
but we can, that's a fee-based system. You can,
Correct.
you can.
but
Yeah,
you know,
yeah. You mean council on aging.
drainage things and
Yeah.
drainage projects and so forth. Sidewalks are a priority, but we've gotten into a pattern of replacing a whole street
I couldn't agree more.
as opposed to repairing in front of the house that's broken.
Right.
Okay? I paid for my sidewalk to be replaced when I put an addition on because we broke up some of the sidewalk. And my whole street was replaced with the exception of myself and another house that had, you know, within the last 10 years put sidewalks in. My whole street didn't need to be replaced. What needed to replace were certain sections where trees had uprooted it and it cracked. But we've gone through it because why? Because it's easier to bid it out, and it's cheaper, we're told,
Per foot.
but we don't need to replace a third of a street, a third of a mile of a street, both sides, when you don't need to do it. And so what we're doing is, we have this plan to replace sidewalks that become a priority in town, when the whole street's not, some streets are really bad, but the majority of them aren't.
Right.
There's sections, right? So is that a priority, or is DPW facility a priority? And that's where the board has to have those conversations.
So you're not convinced that there's so much of a financial crisis as much as we need to manage our money, plan for the future, and plan for our facilities?
Well, if you look at the spending over the last 3 or 4 or 5 years,
One would not think.
you wouldn't think there's an impending financial crisis. I think that when you, because I asked the CFO, where did you come up with 1%? And he said, that's the number we used. If we project out at 2%,
Makes a big difference.
it makes another 3, 4, 5 years. You project that at 3%, right?
Same with healthcare insurance and all that sort of
And quite frankly, if property values go up, it throws it all off. If property values go down, it throws it
There's a
all off.
lot of factors that influence
So
it.
I think when you really, if we really want to get a grasp on this impending fiscal cliff, I would expect that from the town manager on down through all the select board, every member of the select board would be asking for cuts. But I haven't seen that yet.
Yeah, interesting.
You know?
Let me ask you another question.
Sure.
I'm going to talk about the charter for a minute. What's your take on the charter,
It was the worst thing we could have ever done,
and why is that?
because it took control out of people who are elected by people in this community, and I know you're on a commission. It kept town meeting, which, as you saw, town meeting this year can disrupt an article that someone worked on for 7, 8, 9 months out of the year. And what it did is it put in a strong town manager format, and yet you expanded the members of the select board. It really didn't force the schools into the, to the combined finance committee or the finance department that was projected. I was on the board, I think, 2 years after the charter was implemented, and we had members of the charter commission that were coming to the select board meetings demanding that we, start doing reviews of the town manager, that we consolidate every department that had to be consolidated. And when I asked the simple question of why didn't the charter say that, they said we left it open for people to work out. Now, that might have been just their 2 perspectives from 2 people. Excuse me. And you know what, there was a public hearing being held. It was at Williams Middle School, and I spoke at that one, and I said, and I still believe that today, that
During the charter
during the charter review, is that it's not the form of government, it's the people in the government.
That's true.
And you smiled and laughed a little bit. And you could take the
And
charter.
you remember that?
I certainly do, because my belief is that it wasn't because if you look at the confluence of events that brought about the charter, right? It was the Park and Rec decision to
Take down
all the trees, and we had the schools were asking for override after override kind of thing, and there was something, the Water and Sewer Commission versus
the select board.
the select board with the department head there. And what you had at that time, you weren't on the select board at the time, you had this going on. It's their fault, right? So, and I remember that. I remember one select board member saying, I have nothing to do with the trees being cut down at Turner Park. Well, who funds them? Kind of thing. So you do have some control, a little bit. Not a lot, but a little bit at that time.
Independent elected board.
Right. And I think that brought it about, but it brought about a change that, and I'm not saying it wasn't thoughtful and presented, it was.
So what would you prefer?
I think Long Meadow, with a $60 million plus budget, getting up towards $100 million at some point in time, needs a mayor. That would be my belief.
Would that be you?
No.
Want to be the mayor?
No.
Yeah.
I don't think I would want to be, I don't think I would want me as mayor, but.
Yeah.
No, I think that, listen, I don't consider myself a politician, I consider myself a selectman. The reason why I do what I do is because I like this town, I love this town. I grew up in Springfield. I grew up in a neighborhood. This is a neighborhood. It's a 15,000 person neighborhood. And I don't want to see that go away. And unfortunately, I think by some of the actions that were taken, by the spending, we are pushing people away.
What do you mean?
Well, because I think at some point in time, you do have to say uncle when the property taxes continue to go up and there's no revenue being produced. And you don't, Arlene, if we were raising your property taxes and we were pushing a streetlight initiative forward, right? And we were doing those kind of things, say, hey, look, we're trying to offset some of these things. It would be okay. I think people would be okay, but we just keep going to that well one too many times. When taxes, and this is what really torques me, and I got to watch my mouth, but what really torques me is that people have said, oh my gosh, you know, we went to a split tax rate and blah, blah, blah. Do you know in the previous 3 years, taxes in Long Meadow went up 16%, and no one said a word?
Because of the school.
Not just the school, it's the spending. Spending is spending, whether it's just the debt of this high school, it's the debt of water and sewer projects, it's taking debt from the credit card, putting it on the mortgage, and then reusing the credit card again.
16%?
Okay. 16% in 3 years, go look at it.
Oh, cumulative.
Absolutely, over
Yeah,
3 years.
yeah, okay.
But we're at
That's a
this
lot. That's
2.5% limit.
Right.
Right? So when we have $1.5 million in free cash, what would be so bad as saying we're going to take $1 million and put it away in case we want a DPW? So we don't have a $10 million, $20 million DPW, we have a $4 million DPW. Mark Gold and I are going to be presented a plan on the next select board meeting that takes a look at capital spending that will hopefully allow us to save money for projects while increasing the maintenance that we need to do in our facilities, as opposed to just spending all of it every year. And that way, when we do have a project like DPW come up, or the facility, or a council on aging, we might actually have some money that could pay for
Like
that.
we did the police and fire station.
Absolutely, but which was highly criticized, wasn't it? Even though we did it afterwards, right? Because we supposedly drained all the money.
Oh, well, and it was a
Excuse
5 or 6 year
Right, no,
bond.
I'm just
It
saying,
wasn't
right? But,
long. No, I
but
thought,
we did it, that's what this plan kind of encapsulates,
Yeah.
using some of that, but still maintaining
so
the
you can fund it
expenditures.
out of that fund.
Correct.
Yeah, yeah.
Right.
Good, interesting. Wow, so the town manager, you've
Yep.
been not a fan of this particular town manager apparently. What could we do differently?
You know, it's interesting. I think if you look back over the last year, because there was a letter written to the editor from some people about the select board not doing their job, kind of thing.
Okay.
Okay, but you know, if you look at it, there hasn't been anything over the last 2 years that I see where the select board has violated the charter. A violation of the charter would be, for example, if the select board went down to DPW and told them, go plow this street or go cut down this tree. That's a violation of the charter. And by violation, I
Yeah,
mean,
right.
we overstepped our bounds, okay? That under rules,
Yeah.
okay? Asking the town manager to do something is not a violation of the charter. Asking for information is not a violation of the charter. I wasn't the only person that voted against the town manager when he was hired. It was a 3-2 vote. No, it was a 3-2 vote.
I don't even know that.
Right, it was a 3-2 vote. And one person changed their vote because you need 4 to hire. My issues, and I've worked with Robin Crosby, we had, you know, while I was chair, which is the worst thing in the world to happen when you're chair, is have 3 different town managers.
You had an interim.
We had 2 interims and we had the new town manager. But we went from Robin Crosby to Paul Pasturzik, who was an acting town manager, to another gentleman to the current town manager. And part of this is...
Talk about confusion.
It's just, well, I'll tell you what, the good news for Long Meadow is that it kind of runs itself. We have great department heads and some people are retiring. But we've been blessed by having some really good department
Absolutely.
heads who were able to run their departments without having this, you know, managerial control because they were that good.
Right.
And you can't do, I don't think we could run long-term like that, but I mean, we were able
Right.
to do that in a short hops and skips. I think it was a great thing that we were able to have Paul Pasturzik as acting town manager for as long as we did.
And he's been, over the years, he's been
Right.
the go-to guy.
Absolutely. So he
Several
already had that role as, you know, I need an answer, let me go talk to him. So we were very fortunate to have him in that position for that first part. And we started way too late on the town manager search. We probably should have been 3 or 4 months before that. But, you know, for all the knocks that Ms. Crosby had as a town manager that people didn't like her, one of the things about Robin that I really did like is that she knew her job. Okay, she knew her job. She knew what she was supposed to do as town manager. She
Well,
had
she
to
was a
answer,
strong town administrator. I mean, her position was defined as a
but she
strong
had the experience to
administrator
come in
and have
here
it,
and understand things. She torqued people off, but every town manager, if you make a decision, just like a select board member, you make a decision, you're gonna torque off some people, you're gonna upset some people. But if I look at her body of work and say, I think she did a really good job for the town of Long Meadow. I think she took us from a period that was really in flux. We had the DEP issue there with the dumping and stuff, and she took us all through that and managed it. Now, in people, when she was hired, she was kind of thrown into the fire a little bit.
Well, she was the first manager with the charge.
Right, so she was put into this thing
I
where
would
this
say
charger
a
was
big
supposed
time.
to.
It's a big challenge.
And she was thrown into the fire, and I think she did well for her term here and stuff. I don't have an issue with the town manager in terms of, I know what I need to do and I know what he needs to do. I have a concern in regards to flow of information.
So let's separate the town manager position. We're talking about an individual right now.
Right, but I think the town manager's role is you answer to 5 people. That's it. The town manager doesn't answer to the taxpayer. I do, as an
Well,
elected official.
Okay. Well, he has to interact. The
But
person
he doesn't
has-
answer to them. So you as a citizen can't go and say, we want to fire the town manager.
Right.
We want to hire the town manager. It isn't going to happen. So in that relationship, there's only 5 people. It's the same five positions that were there when we hired the first town manager. So nothing has changed in that regard. And I challenge anybody to go back and take a look at any meeting in which I told the town manager that you better do this or else or anything like that, and I haven't. Okay? I have disagreements of how things are presented. I can have disagreements with flows of information and what's not being presented. And I can tell you that when I first got on the board, our town manager and department heads never met on a regular basis. They met when they needed something, type of thing. I asked Robin Crosby, and she did it. She put together a weekly department meeting.
Department head meeting.
Department head meeting,
Right.
because we had an issue where 2 departments weren't talking to each other, and it was a little dust up or something, but that's a different story. But so this way, the idea was that you get this flow of information, just not between town manager and select board, but from department heads through the town manager to the select board, just about what's going on. And I don't think there's anything wrong with asking what's going on. That, and as I always told Robin, that, my biggest beef is finding out about it at Big Y, because you don't want to be surprised when someone says, "Did you hear about X, Y, and Z?" Especially when something happens on your street, And part of it, Arlene, is that I believe that if you don't have that type of information, you either act as if to residents, that you either don't care about what's happening around you, or you don't respect them to understand what's going on. And I don't mean every little detail, but there really should be more communication between the town manager and the select board, regardless of who's in what position when. Those two positions should be like this.
So the next manager that's hired, you're going to look for some different qualities then?
Depending on when that is, yeah.
Yeah, sure.
I think, listen, we had great candidates, I think, in the very last round. I think they were. My attitude, I remember, one person said, well, and it was during a public meeting, said, "What are you looking for?" I said, "I'm looking for someone who doesn't need to look to the select board and say, what do I need to do today?"
Self-starter.
Okay, and just have that experience of understanding, here's the laws of Massachusetts, here's the lay of the land, this is how things work in our state. And I think that's important, the background and experience of a candidate are important, and where they're coming from and that type of thing. I don't think the issues, and I never thought the issues were insurmountable between the select board and the town manager. I just think sometimes when you have people that draw lines in the sand on either side of that line, it doesn't tend to work well.
Mm-hmm. Do you do that?
Do I draw lines in the sand?
Mm-hmm.
I try not to. Okay. I'm very opinionated, as you may know.
No, that's okay.
No, but I mean, I'm very opinionated. I have my beliefs, but I really believe that, I'm not, listen, a lot of people don't like other members of, I'm not saying, I mean public, you hear all the time, "Oh, that so-and-so drives me nuts." I appreciate different perspectives. I really do, because I have a certain way of thinking, but I know when I hear someone else's way of thinking. And one of the favorite people I used to love being on the select board was William Schiavelli, because William had a different way of looking at something. And when I listened to him, I could understand it. I still might not agree with him, but I could at least understand the perspective that he was bringing to the board or to the issue. And sometimes he changed my mind because of his perspective on it. And I appreciate that, because I have a certain way of looking at things, and it's not right all the time, and I know that.
Great. Well, listen, I've just gotten the signal that we're hitting our 30-minute mark.
Who's in charge here? No,
You are, I guess.
no, I appreciate it. Thank you to LCTV for doing this, because I
Well,
think it's
thank you.
important for people to
Thank
hear.
you. Well, I appreciate your enthusiasm for what you're doing, and certainly the time you've put into this position, because nobody would question that you haven't put in a lot of time for it. And good luck
Thank
in
you.
your re-election. So, Paul Santinello running for re-election on June 9th.
That's right. Most people don't even know there's an election.
Yes.
There is one.
Yeah, then it's really, there's no other big issue. There's no big override question or dog leash law question
No.
or something like that. It's just candidates, but it's an important election because
Correct.
2 of our major boards, both the school committee and the select board, have contested
Which is a good
races.
thing.
It's a good thing.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I
and
think
so,
it is.
but I hope a lot of people do come out and voice their opinion, and this is why we're doing this, to introduce the candidates to the public. But thank you, and thank you to our audience for listening, and please remember to vote on June 9th. Thank you.
Thank you.